In lesson 7-6, we're going to be talking about percent of change. We have a key word here. The key word is the word change. Okay, whenever you think change, we're thinking subtract. How is it changing? It goes from point A to point B, so it changed. We want to know how much did it change by, and then we're going to figure out what that change is as a percent. So you see here, the percent of change is the answer that we get from the amount of change divided by the original amount. So the original is also going to be key for us to identify. To find the percent of change, do the following. Subtract to find the amount of change. So they're going to give you A and B, and we need to figure out what is the difference. You can always put the larger number first. It doesn't really matter, but find the difference. Then write the ratio. How much change over the original amount, and then you're going to get that as a decimal, and then we're going to convert the decimal to a percent. So remember, the decimal to a percent, you move it 2 to the right, and then add your percent symbol. Okay, so let's go ahead and try it. Shopping. Last year, a sweater sold for $56. This year, the same sweater sells for $60. So find the percent of change in the cost of the sweater and round to the nearest whole percent. That's important, whole percent if necessary. So we want to find how much did this change. So just put the biggest number first. Do 60 minus 56, okay? What did that change by? Well, you get 4. Change by $4. So we're going to put 4 on the top of the ratio, and then what is the original amount? Well, what does that mean, okay? Well, last year is always the original compared to this year. Or yesterday is always the original compared to today. Or 10 minutes ago is the original compared to now. So what is the original amount? Would be the $56. Not because it's less, but because it was last year's price. Okay, so we're going to have 4 over 56. We'll just go ahead and grab your calculators and go ahead and divide that. Let's do 4 divided by 56. And we get this big, long number right here, okay? So 0.071. That's about all we need to write. So we're going to say 0.071. Okay, now remember, this is a decimal. We want a percent. So we need to move it 1, 2 to the right. And that gives us 7.1%. But it says round to the nearest whole percent. So we're going to say that's about 7%. And this was an increase. Okay, so it says find the percent of increase. I would like you to kind of get in the habit of knowing whether it was an increase or a decrease. I know a lot of times we either say it's negative or it's positive, but in this case we don't want to say that. We want to say it's an increase or it's a decrease. But instead of writing the word out, just give me an arrow for an up arrow for increase and a down arrow for decrease. It does say round to the nearest whole percent. So this is a 7% increase in price. Okay, so for example 2, on the first day of school this year, 435 students reported to Howard Middle School. Last year on the first day, 460 students attended. So find the percent of change for the first day's attendance and round to the nearest whole percent if necessary. So we just want to find the difference first. That's the very first thing. We want to say 460 minus 435, okay? And so you can either do this by hand or you can type it in your calculator. So we get 25 as a total change. So we're going to put that on the top of the ratio, and we want to put the original. Now let's determine what is the original. Again, remember what I said. Yesterday is always the original compared to today. So this is the first day of school this year is 435. But last year on the first day there was 460. So I'm going to go ahead and say that 460 is the original, okay? Because it was last year. So now let's take our 25 and divide it by 460, and it's going to give us a big decimal. So we're going to get 0.054, and that's enough for me. So 0.054 is what we can write. 0.054, I always put a 0 in front of the decimal too, even if I don't say it. Now let's move this 2 places to the right, so we get 5.4%, but it says round to the nearest whole percent, so I'm going to say that's about 5%. Now, is that an increase or a decrease? Well, this year is 435 students. Last year was 460 students. So this is a 5% decrease. So maybe more families moved out of that town, or maybe the school's having a tough time. I don't know. But this is a 5% decrease in students from last year to this year. Okay, so for example 3, the table shows the annual city budget for Layton for 4 years. Which statement is supported by the table? Okay, so we have some statements here that we need to match with what's actually occurring in this table. All right, so the budget decreased and then increased. Is that true? Well, it's increasing here, it's increasing here, and then it decreases. So did it decrease and then increase? No, I don't think so. So I'm going to get rid of that one. The greatest budget increase occurred from 08 to 09. So is this the greatest increase? Well, let's do some stuff with our calculator here. Let's find out the increase in that year. So let's do 26.2 minus 24.9, and that was 1.3. So I'm going to write that as a note right here. So this is up plus 1.3. And then I'm going to go ahead and find out what it was right here. So we'll do 24.9 minus 23.1, and that was a plus 1.8. So B is not correct because the greatest increase occurred between 07 and 08, and these are millions of dollars. So 1.8 million, 1.3 billion. Okay, letter C, the budget increased 15% from 07 to 010. So did it increase 15%? We'll have to figure that out. And then the budget decreased 3% from 9 to 10. So is this a 3% decrease, or is this a 15% increase? All right, so we got some work to do here. We got to figure out which one of those it is. Well, first of all, we got to figure out how much change there was. Well, we have 25.5 minus the 23.1. So we have this here and this here. So that's going to be a change of 2.4. So let's put 2.4 over. Now, I always said last year is greater than this year, so 23.1 is the original. So let's figure out what the percent is here. We have 2.4 divided by 23.1. And that gives us a 0.104 if we're rounding, 0.104. And if we make that a percent, it's going to be about 10.4%, because remember we rounded, and that would be an increase. But the question was, is it 15% increase? No, it looks like it's a 10.4, so it looks like C is not correct. So let's go ahead and prove that D is the correct letter just by working it out. Okay, so we're looking for a 3% decrease. So we're going to do 26.2 minus 25.5. And let's figure out what that is as a decrease. So 26.2 minus 25.5. So we have a 0.7 change there. So let's do 0.7 over, okay, and we're going to want to compare that to 26.2. And so let's go ahead and figure that out. We're looking for 3%, hopefully. So 0.7 divided by 26.2. And if we move the decimal 2 places, 1, 2, we get 2.7 if we round it, okay? So 2.7%, and 2.7% will round to 3%. So we could say that this is about 3% as a decrease. So D would be the correct answer for us here. So that was a lot of work because we had to figure out the percentage change for 2 different problems there to prove it right. Okay, so it says round to the nearest whole percent, state whether the percent of change is an increase or a decrease. Well, if we're starting at 1/2 and going to 1/4, I already know that it's going to be a decrease, so I'm going to circle that right away so I remember. Okay, now we need to find the difference. Well, to find a difference, we're going to have a common denominator, right? So we're going to have to do 2/4 minus 1/4 because, multiply both of these by 2, and so we have that over there. So we're going to have a change. We're going to have a change of 1/4. Okay, and so when we do a change of 1/4, then we gotta divide, right? So let's go ahead and convert these to decimals. So we'll go 0.25 divided by 0.5. What do we get when we do that? Well, 0.25 divided by 0.5 gives us 0.5. Now we got to move it 2 places to the right. So we have a 50% decrease. Now that does make sense, right? Because if I show you 1/2, a semicircle, and then we have a half of a whole, and then we go to a quarter. We cut off a half. That's a 50%. We cut 50% of it off. So it makes sense that it's a 50% decrease. Okay, so round to the nearest whole percent. State whether the percentage change is an increase or decrease. Well, we're going from 1/5 to 4/5, so I know that this is going to be an increase right away, just like we knew that this was going to be a decrease right away. So let's go ahead and figure out, now you can simply just compare the top numbers, okay? Just like last problem, I didn't really do that, but once you get a common denominator, just simply compare your top numbers. Okay, let's do that. I know that I did it here using decimals, but just do 2 minus 1. Well, that equals 1. Okay, and then I'm going to do 1 divided by what was the original. Well, the original here was the 2 because it came first. So that's 2, and that equals 0.5, which is 50%. Okay. So let's try it that way for this one. We do have a common denominator, so let's find the change. 4 minus 1 is 3. Okay, so I'm going to put 3 on top. Now, what was the original? Well, it started at a 1. So let's put it 3 over 1. Well, 3 over 1 is 3. Now, you got to move it 2 places to the right. So we're going to have 300% increase. And that makes sense because you started with 1/5, now you get 4/5. That's a big time increase because you just had a little sliver before. Now we almost have a whole. So that's another way to think about these. I know I didn't start with that with this one here, but one way to think about it is if you have a common denominator, just focus on the numerator itself. So we could kind of do another one here. We could say 3/4 to 7/8. Okay, we don't have a common denominator, so multiply both top and bottom by 2. So I'm going to get 6/8 to 7/8. All right, now I have a common denominator, so just look at the top numbers. Think of it like 6 to 7, and that's it. You don't have to think about your denominators anymore. So 7 minus 6 equals 1, so put 1 over, and the original is 6. So 1 over 6. Do 1 divided by 6, and that gives us 0.116 repeating. If you move the decimal 2 places, 1, 2, remember this number would be a 6 because it is repeating. All right, so if we rounded the nearest whole percent, we'd have 17%, and since 6 is smaller than 7, it's a 17% increase. So to go from 3/4 to 7/8 would be a 17% increase. So again, with fractions, just get a common denominator and then just think about the numerators. So you could even rewrite it. You don't even have to remember or think about the denominator anymore. Just rewrite it as 6 to 7. In this case, we could just think, well, we're going from 2 to 1. Okay, so it's a 50% decrease. And in this case, we went from 1 to 4, and that's all you're thinking about. You went from 1 to 4 because the denominators are the same. So feel free to watch the online tutorials or the step-by-step homework helper for all the odd number problems.